Hello everyone, back tuning into the autumn 2017 forecast from GavsWeathers.com. So over the past 3 months we've been doing updates for the autumn in terms of trying to get things together and think about what may happen in the season ahead. So we've been having a look at analogues. I'm going to talk you through the analogues that we've looked at in a moment. We've also been having a look at long-range seasonal models as well. We did the third and final seasonal model roundup for the autumn of 2017 yesterday here at the website. You can find that on the autumn updates page. Now, essentially, through the 3 model updates, the models have been going for a very mild autumn. The signals have always been very mild and differing a little bit on the precipitation side of things, but generally quite Atlantic driven and I'll say very mild with the temperature signal. Yesterday's update was quite interesting because a couple of the long-range models, which were CAN 6, CFS-V2, kind of backed off that mild signal a little bit, and they were closer towards average with the temperatures. But overall, taking all the long-range models together, the signal was very strongly for a mild and fairly unsettled Atlantic driven type autumn. So what we're going to do now is put the model update together with the analogues and see if we can come up with a forecast. So it's proving to be a little bit difficult again this season because, well, I'll talk you through the analogues in a moment, but essentially there are very few years to really work with in terms of the analogues that we have been looking at. But we are going to issue the autumn forecast for you shortly, and I'll get on with the video in a moment. Before we go on with that, we'll just say that later on today, once this is out of the way, once the autumn forecast is done, we'll have a sneak peek for the winter of 2017-2018. That video will be here on the homepage this afternoon. It'll be quite interesting, and it's ahead of the winter updates, which will begin 1 week today, and I'll talk about that at the end of this video. So just a quick recap on yesterday's season 1 roundup. This is the mean sea level pressure anomaly from the GLOSY 5 UK Met Office model. This is quite indicative of the kind of thing we were seeing in that third and final season model roundup, with lots of models tending to have Atlantic-driven signals for the autumn, and this one was no exception. So a mild but quite wet autumn was being signalled by the UK Met Office model in yesterday's final seasonal model roundup. And I say it wasn't alone, several of the models were going in that sort of direction as well. So just recap over the analogues that we've been looking at. Our good friend James Atwill has been helping us out with the analogues. As always, I couldn't do these long-range updates without James's input. I know James will be watching the autumn forecast along with Rescue, so big thanks to James for all of his help again through this season. So the first analogues package that we looked at was dealing with ENSO conditions. So what we was looking at essentially is from a starting point of weak La Nina, because this year, 2017, it began with one of the weakest La Ninas on record. So that was our starting point, weak La Nina. And then weak La Ninas, but by the summer, had become sort of ENSO neutral. We did think a little bit about El Nino, but it was the ENSO neutral summers that were the most interesting summers following a weak La Nina, because that's kind of like the situation we're in at the moment. And then, of course, the idea is that you take those parameters, so the weak La Nina going back to ENSO neutral, and you have a look at what happened in the autumns of those years. So this was our first analogues package in terms of ENSO autumns, which were ENSO neutral autumns, but following a weak La Nina. And we saw that there was a very strong signal for an unsettled autumn. So we was placing below average heights, which is low pressure, very much around the UK, to the north of the UK, and bringing in the westerlies rather like that. So a bit of an Atlantic onslaught, generally quite wet, mild, and perhaps even in some cases stormy autumns. Now, of course, there are autumns within these years that deviate from that a little bit. So not every autumn would show this kind of pattern. But once you put all of the autumns together, when you see the full list of years that we've got on the side of the chart here, I won't go through them all now, but there's all of the years, we've put them all together. That is the mean sort of reanalysis chart that you come out with in terms of the 500 millibar height anomaly. The second round of analogues that we looked at were a little bit controversial, really, because we were looking at front-loaded summers. So this is where we've had the warmer and drier conditions and more anticyclonic conditions in the early part of the summer, and then there's a deterioration in the second half of summer. And the reason I say that's a bit controversial is because for the north, for Scotland, you have never been included in any fine, dry or warm weather for any sustained period of time. So this really just applies to England and Wales. But I was struggling to come up with another sort of analogues package that we could look at, because we would either go with front-loaded summers or we just go with very unsettled summers. But I thought that in the end, the front-loaded summers were probably going to be the ones to go with. So we had to divide those front-loaded summers into years that had high pressure in the early part of the summers, and then years that were warm in the early part of the summer, because the two aren't sort of mutually exclusive. You can get early summer periods that are anticyclonic but quite cool, and equally you can get some early summer periods that are really warm but quite unsettled and wet. So we had to divide those front-loaded summers into two sort of categories. So this is the all years combined chart for the high pressure dominated front-loaded summers, and this shows a very unsettled autumn following those high pressure dominated front-loaded summer. So again, we're placing the trough very much around the UK, this time centred a little bit to the west of the UK, and bringing the flow of the jet stream through like that. So really strong signal with these front-loaded, high-pressure dominated summers to be a very unsettled autumn following those high-pressure front-loaded summers. And then the next sort of category we looked at were these front-loaded summers from a temperature perspective. So these summers tended to be warmer in the early part of summer, but not necessarily anticyclonic and drier. And what we see with this, again, it's a very strong signal for an unsettled autumn. So again, deep trough here with these autumns around the UK and to the west of the UK as well, bringing the flow and the jet stream through rather like that. So if we combine the two, if we combine the front-loaded summers from a high-pressure perspective, if we combine the front-loaded summers from a warm perspective, this is what we come out with. And there aren't all that many years within these, actually. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of them. And this going back to 1950, I should say, rather than going back before that. And what we find is, again, very, very unsettled signal. So, again, we've got the trough centering around just the west of the UK. Not particularly cold signal, though, because we are bringing in a west-southwesterly flow here. Although we have got some northern blocking, it's not really pushing cold air into this trough. So, these autumns look very unsettled generally. Of course, there will be deviations, but across these analogues, they look very unsettled. They look low pressure dominated, albeit the trough is sometimes in a slightly different position. But troughiness is around the UK, and quite deep troughiness at that, whichever analogues package we look at. And they're not anticyclonic, they're very cyclonic, they're very unsettled autumns overall. And overall, not all that cold either. Generally, I would have thought many of these autumns are coming out on the milder side of things. Now, I did want to include a few analogues for the autumn forecast. I'll get on to the autumn forecast for you very shortly. So I asked James if he could go back and try and combine the ENSO state autumns with the front-loaded summer autumns, if you see what I mean. So try to bring everything together. James attempted to do that, but back to 1950, it was not possible. There were no autumns that were similar in terms of what's happened with ENSO, going from the weak landing into ENSO neutral, and having front-loaded summers. There were no year back to 1950 that could be combined. So James actually went further back than that before 1950, and as ever, James came through for us big time, because he did manage to get together 3 autumns that kind of combine it all together. So I'll just very quickly talk you through those autumns that bring all of these analogues together. The first autumn would be 1895. This is the reanalysis for the autumn of 1895. It looks like a mild autumn, really. We've got above average heights centering across many parts of Europe. We've got below average heights down there in the Atlantic, and we'd be doing something a bit like that with the flow. So that looks a very mild autumn in 1895. Probably not overly wet, although there would be unsettled conditions at times. Excuse me. The main thing would be reasonably on the drier side, but also very mild. Our next autumn is 1917. Again, this is bringing together the ENSO years with the front-loaded sort of summer years. And what we see in the autumn of 1917 is a very unsettled pattern. This is more like what you'd expect. That year, 1895, kind of deviates overall from the expected pattern, which would be very cyclonic and unsettled. But this one, 1917, does look much more like what you'd expect. Deep trough of low pressure around the UK and to the north, bringing in the westerlies like that. So again, it's Atlantic driven. It's not overly cold, though there will be some cool conditions at times, but the main thing is very unsettled. And then the last autumn is 1934. Again, remember, this is combining all of the analogues that we've looked at through this season. It's combining the ENSO state analogues with the front-loaded summer analogues, and this is what we come out with, the autumn of 1934. Again, looks quite unsettled, not to the same degree as the autumn of 1917, but nevertheless it still looks like we've got a trough generally through the western part of Europe, doing something like that with flow and with the jet stream. Again, it's quite Atlantic driven. It's probably not overly cold, in fact it could be quite mild, but it is overall very sort of unsettled type autumn. So if we combine those 3 years, unfortunately we've only got 3 years to go at, which is the caveat, of course. There's not much to go at, and I mean, if we had sort of 9 or 10 years, then that would be a much greater range of years to sort of discuss, but we've only got 3 of them. They are all before 1950. But if we combine the 3 autumns together, 1895, 1917 and 1934, this is what we come out with, a very unsettled signal overall, with low pressure close to the country. Interestingly, very close to all of these analogues that we've looked at through the earlier part of the season. So the analogues and the models all seem to be coming together really at the moment to be indicating the chance of a very unsettled autumn. And I think that's what we're going to go with actually this year. I think we're going to suggest that we are likely to have quite an unsettled autumn, certainly compared to last year. We had a very dry autumn. I think we will have a much more unsettled autumn this year. I suspect through the early part of the autumn it's likely to be a little bit on and off. We can't, our methodology doesn't really allow us to break this down into monthly periods. But my good friend Terry Scholey is actually very useful for sort of breaking all of this down into monthly periods. So I have had a look at Terry's autumn forecast. It's a fantastic piece of work, by the way. If you haven't seen Terry's autumn forecast yet, please do check it out. It's on Terry's page at the website. It's a bit of it's a masterpiece really in terms of long range forecasting. I was spellbound when I read the extraordinarily detailed and in-depth report that Terry came up with for his autumn forecast. Not necessarily just from the autumn forecast perspective, but just all the detail and effort that had gone into it was an extraordinary piece of work. And please do check out Terry Scholey's autumn forecast if you haven't yet done so. Anyway, coming back to Gazzovi's forecast, so Terry's input has been invaluable as ever in getting this together. So I think the earlier part of the autumn, it will be unsettled even in the earlier part of the autumn, but I suspect it will be a little bit on-off. So at times we will get ridging and some warmer, drier interludes through September and probably even into October, but not completely settled. There will be unsettled periods. I mean, I think as we go deeper into the autumn, we probably find the weather becoming increasingly unsettled. This is sort of going into the last stages of October and through to November. I think probably find weather becoming increasingly unsettled, probably increasingly stormy as well. So we could have quite a wild period of weather actually at some point through this autumn, probably in the middle part of the autumn and through to November. In terms of temperature, and that's probably going to give us above average rainfall for the autumn, so I think we will come out across most parts of the country with rainfall above average. In terms of temperatures for this autumn, quite interesting, because I think it's going to be a milder than average autumn. However, as we start getting into this stormier period, I think we may start to find the jet stream beginning to dig a little bit further southwards. So as we get through into the last stages of the autumn, it's not out of the question, but we might start to find some quite not only stormy weather but quite cold weather coming along. And I think November probably holds the best prospect for some colder conditions through this autumn, whereas September and October are likely to be fairly mild, I would have thought. But by November, if the stormy conditions are coming off, if the jet stream is really digging in and digging down, then I think, particularly on the backside of some of these stormy systems, we might find colder air digging in, giving us probably fairly brief cold snaps. But they could be fairly potent cold snaps as well, you see what I mean? So maybe only lasting a couple of days, well, 3 days, and then back to the stormy conditions. But within those 2 or 3 days of colder weather, they could be really quite potent cold snaps. And they will probably be enough if they come off to be producing snow, especially in the northern part of the country. So that's it. That's the Gazzovi's autumn forecast. We're going for a very active season ahead. I think it's going to be a really interesting autumn coming up. I don't think we're going to have a long run of sustained anticyclonic weather such as we had last autumn. I think we will get periods of high pressure, as I say, especially earlier in the autumn. But even then, I think we will have unsettled conditions at times. As we go further and further on, I think it gets increasingly unsettled, probably increasingly stormy. Overall, though, temperatures are coming out above average. Rainfall is coming out above average. And it's later on that we go into that stormier and probably colder period as we get through into the latter stages of the autumn. As ever, we will see how we do with this, and we'll evaluate it. We always evaluate the forecast at gazzovis.com, the long-range forecast, when we issue them. In a couple of weeks, we'll have the evaluation for the summer forecast. I don't think that went terribly well, but we'll see what the evaluation has to say in a couple of weeks' time for the summer forecast. And when we get to the end of this season, we will evaluate this forecast. So in the early stages of December sometime, we will issue an evaluation for this autumn forecast, and we'll see how we did. And that's how we progress on. It's only by evaluating our work as long-range forecasters that we can see what happened and maybe try and correct mistakes if and when they occur. So that's the autumn forecast done and dusted. I think it's going to be quite an interesting season ahead. And of course, the long-range bandwagon now rolls on to winter. So as I said at the beginning of this video, this afternoon, we're going to have a sneak peek for the autumn of 2017-2018. That's going to be really very interesting indeed. And a week today, just 1 week away now, there we go, 1 week away, we are going to begin again the winter updates every week, every Sunday. From next week through to the end of November, there will be a winter update. Update 1 is just 1 week away, so it's getting very, 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 very close now. Okay, this video is going to be placed on the autumn updates and forecast page. There'll be a written report that goes with it. That'll be later on today, probably around 6, 7 o'clock. Don't forget to check out the winter sneak peek. It will be posted here on the homepage this afternoon. Tomorrow, our historic video is going to be having a look at 1952. We'll be starting in the summer, so covering the Lynmouth disaster, and then going through the autumn into the winter, covering the smog of December 1952. If we have time, we'll have a look at the severe flooding of January 1953 as well. That will be tomorrow's Bank Holiday Monday historic video. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.